Well, I've known Vicki for a very long time, and I just recently completed the Master Gardener class, so I'm very excited that we have all these Master Gardeners here because Vicki's very well respected by the Master Gardeners. I knew Vicki before she went to work with me at the Department of Human Services, so, you know, when she worked for Youth Bridge. So Vicki and I go way back, and we could tell you all sorts of stories about DHS, but anyway, you don't want to hear those. Anyway, so I've known Vicki for years. I have so much respect for her. I like to listen to her Gardening the Ozarks show on KTLO at 10 o'clock, and her and Bob talking on the morning. So anyway, I'm very pleased that she's here tonight to present her program. So here's Vicki Garner.
Yay.
Don't let all this scare you. They've told me I'll be through when they pull the cord. And I'll try and keep it moving. When Jennifer asked me to speak to the Baxter County Historical Society, I kind of thought, what in the world should I talk about? I'm used to talking about plants and their problems. How many of you all are natives? You raise your hand. Oh, quite a few of you. I'm talking about natives tonight. It's a topic that I think bears some justice right now because of the fact that it's becoming more and more evident that we've kind of forgotten about our natives. Not you guys, you're doing fine, but the natives that are native plants. And we're also going to talk a little bit about heirloom plants. And I'm so glad to be here tonight. Some of you may find some heirlooms when you get to cleaning out your closets. You never know. But I'm glad to be here. I did start, when we first moved here, I opened a plant shop, and we moved it into lawn and garden, and we leased plants at the doctor's offices, and we covered the whole thing, the whole gamut. But then as my kids grew up and got older, and I knew they were leaving and probably going to college and this, that, and the other, I was losing my workforce. And so I said, maybe I need to look in another direction. And that's Jennifer and I met, and we have been here a long time. We've been here 41 years this year. So I almost consider myself a native. I am a native Arkansan in that respect, having been born in Helena, Arkansas, raised in Little Rock, and graduated from the University of Arkansas. And so I'm an Arkansas native anyway. But as far as plants, I decided that native plants and heirloom seeds would be sort of a real good fit for this tonight for two reasons, and that is because we're all native somewhere, and we know that that's an important thing, and to remember our being natives and where we are and where we're comfortable and where we grew up or where we are now, whatever's the best fit. And then heirlooms. Heirlooms are really important, and they are coming back. Heirloom seeds in particular are making a comeback. In the last 5 to 10 years, I've kind of been watching, and I do a tremendous amount of research and reading as to the subjects that I talk about on KTLO. And I have noticed that I'm seeing them crop up. Heretofore, when Burpees would put out a catalog, and they were an old catalog from the 1800s, most everything in there began being hybrids. And hybrids made a great impact on the way we garden. It used to be when we gardened, we had seeds that did well in our area that maybe Aunt Josephine had, and she passed on to us, or they had plants that they grew from regular heirloom seeds. And those seeds came down. But now people in California wanted some tomatoes, especially in Utah too. And Florida said, wow, let's go commercial. And Burpees went commercial. Park Seed went commercial. And they developed hybrid seeds. Not a bad thing. But over time, what has happened, I think, and this is truly just my personal opinion, is that those seeds that produce hybrids, which are good because they work them every year, you get new ones and new ones, have now gone into an area I'm not going to talk about a lot, but I want you to know it exists. It's the GMO seeds, genetically modified seeds. We've gone past just messing with enzymes and things, and maybe adding the fact that certain tomatoes are inherently insect resistant to some degree, pest resistant to some degree. We're going past that, and I think that it's something we need to think about. there's also such a thing, and then I'll get on with my topic, but there's also something I want you to be aware of, and there is a movement right now to patent seeds. P-A-T-E-N-T, put a patent on a seed. And big corporations are looking at it very seriously, because that means that the small farmer cannot get the seed. He would have to pay for the patent to grow that tomato or that thing. So today I'm going to take us back to where I think we need to kind of swing the pendulum. And I think it's going that way. It's not going fast enough for me, frankly, but it is going back. I know that hybrids are good, and I know my dad was so thrilled when Big Boy hit the catalogs. He loved Big Boys. I love Better Boys. There's nothing wrong with that. But there are certain things that I think we need to consider, and I think history is one of them. And I think that to forget history is we are doomed, not a good thing, in so many areas that we are in. President James Madison stated this in 1818. Is as true today as it was then, I think. He said, man has to find a place within the symmetry of nature without destroying it. That's pretty good words in 1818, because the country was rather young then, and we didn't have the hybrids we have now. We didn't have the genetic modifications we have now. We just had things that were handed down. As the early landscape was changing with growth at times, the growth that was happening with those who moved east to west. I'm considering that the early settlers, came from Europe, hit the east coast, and they moved across the country as time progressed. They changed the landscape to suit the times. Many native plants were displaced by landscape that the settlers developed, and progress was determined by the times. In the past 10 or so years, more people are realizing the importance native plants play in the ecology. A broad definition of native plant, and there are a bazillion of them out there. Trust me, I found them in the last 2 months. There are tons of different definitions, but they all kind of boil down to the fact that a native plant is one that occurs naturally in a particular region or habitat without direct human intervention. The plants present at the time the Europeans arrived in North America are considered native. And from then on, things changed. The landscape was changed. Arkansas native plants are uniquely adapted, and this is important to think about wherever you live. They are uniquely adapted to live with our soils, our climate, and our wildlife. For example, certain plants that, as you know, exist here, you couldn't grow if you came from Illinois or from Wisconsin or even from Maine. And the ones that live in Maine do not do well down here. It gets too hot. Some benefits of using native plants are that once they're established, they do not really require a lot of water, which is really nice. And if you'll look at some of them, especially privets and things like that grow on nothing, some of them are good, some of them are not. Some are truly invasive, and that's a whole other issue too. But they do not take the resources that native plants do. You can use once you get a native plant established, it will pretty well exist on the amount of rainfall you get, because it has become acclimated. That's why it's a native plant. They require less pruning, which would be great, because that is one of the questions I get at least 40 times a month on the radio. Pruning is such a terrifying subject for most people, and it's not all that bad. It's just that you have to do it at certain times, and almost everything that you purchase, if you're purchasing landscape plants, you will have to prune at one time or another. And also native plants require fewer pesticides because they've acclimated to the bugs that are in the area, and they have become resistant, quite frankly. Here in Arkansas, we have a very varied ecosystems. North Arkansas, of course, where we are, is totally different from South Arkansas. And I think that a lot of people don't realize this when they look for plants, because if you've ever looked across, you know what those lines are that go across the map that show the regions and the areas? Okay, that's very, very important. We're at 6A and 7A. We're kind of in the middle. We're very, and I'm speaking strictly of the mountain home area and across in this section, because the upper part of Baxter County is so close to Missouri that we fall into that zone, which is a 6. And we also are part of the upper part of 7, which is what Arkansas in general is. And so you have to be kind of careful. So it's very important when you look at your plants, and if you're going to buy plants, and this is totally aside, but I want to mention it because about 4 or 5 years ago I realized that this was happening. I kept seeing plants at the big box stores, you know, and by the way, they've got tomatoes now. Today. I went up to the guy taking them off of the truck and I said, have you lost your mind? Well, I didn't tell him that he had. I just thought, has everybody lost their mind? Because this is nuts. And he said, well, I put them on rolling tray things, so maybe they'll bring them in. And I just looked at him and thought, oh, this is tragic. Because they have lettuce, they have everything, and we will have a frost, but I digress. but anyway, you do really need to, and the other thing is that several years ago, I was noticing plants that were designated perennial in our Home Depot, our Lowe's and Walmart. And I went to the manager of one of the stores and I said, these are not perennial. And he said, I know. And I said, well, what's the deal? He said, because we're at the cutoff. We get our stuff from the growers in Texas. Do you know how hot it gets in Texas and how not cold? And we are right below the cutoff for St. Louis. So Missouri, St. Louis, and St. Louis is much closer to our ecological setting. So I want you to be aware when you look for plants. Make sure, number one, that you do look for perennial or annual, but question the fact if they're that way here. They, unfortunately, most of them do not have a temperature zone that would be very helpful for us to say, but some of them do. But I want you to read the small print, and that's why I brought it up tonight, because I thought, my word, you know, you're buying something, you're trusting that it will work here. That's the whole point, and half the time it may not do that. But anyway, what the ecosystems that we have and the ecological areas allows us to grow, and this is the good news, 600 native wildflowers. And wildflowers are gaining in popularity just for the very reason that they're native plants. And if they're native in our area, they will do well in our area. And I think they're wonderful. They're hardy, and you see them in state parks, you see them along rivers, in ditches, and they're just a wonderful addition to any area, I think. For a few of them are like bird's foot violet, of course, black-eyed Susans, which, you know, once you plant one, if you let them go to seed, you're going to have a bazillion soon. And they're very hardy, great cut flower, and all of that. Butterfly weed, which is great, but don't try to transplant it. It doesn't want to be transplanted. A goldenrod, purple coneflower, Queen Anne's lace, all of these also, bear in mind, are great pollinators. And one of the big issues right now, and probably will be for a long time, is the pollination and the fact that we're losing bees, we're losing all of those things that are beneficial to our environment. Hello. There's a real good books that I just love, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with Carl Hunter. Yes, isn't he great? And his books are wonderful. If you are at Gaston's Visitor Center or probably any other visitor center, I think they almost always carry that series of books. And his wildflower book is just beautiful. It has wonderful, beautiful color photos and of the actual plants. And his knowledge of that is just quite amazing. I'm trying to find, I left some paper and pencils back there if you want to write any of this down. If you don't, you can see me afterwards, because Holland Wildflower Farm is one of the best, and it's in Arkansas. It's in Elkins, Arkansas. You used to be able to go over there and tour, and I don't believe that you're allowed in anymore because they've gotten so big and are providing local and nationally wildflower seed. But I've got their thing, and if you Google, you can Google Arkansas wildflowers, and this will come up also. But it's a really good place. And talking about native plants, Pine Ridge Gardens, we are very, very blessed to have Pine Ridge Gardens in Arkansas. It's a small place, but huge acreage-wise, but it's family-owned, and they have a wonderful selection of flowers and trees and shrubs, all sorts that are basically pollinator plants that you can get. And I know that they package them beautifully, and they'll mail them to you, and they are having what is theirs? Yeah, they sent me their thing, and they're having an open house on weekends. That's the only time they're open because they're so busy packaging. If you want to know the dates and the location and are interested in going, it would be well worth your while, especially if you want to add any native plants, because they are just excellent. But back to native plants. Some notable natives, and I thought I'd just mention a few because it's kind of fun to know some of the natives of Arkansas. The grape Cynthiana. Have any of you ever heard of the grape Cynthiana? It's C-Y-N-T-H-I-A-N-A. It is the oldest native North American grape in commercial cultivation today. It was first identified in 1770. What fascinates me about this is these dates have come down, and they are true, and that people somewhere cared enough to write all this down. I think it's just magnificent, and that we have got it, and now it's on Google, so you don't even have to carry a book around. But it's the oldest one, and it was first identified in 1770. Sometimes, you like this, Cynthiana is referred to as the Cabernet of the Ozarks. It's been a very productive wine, and I think Wiedekers, if you're all familiar with Wiedekers down at Altus, is one of the ones that had personalized it and made it what it is today. It is winter hardy, and in Arkansas and Missouri, it is the main producers are the main producers of the grape, and it's very highly disease resistant. Which, of course, in that kind of industry, if you're producing wine by the case and whatnot, you want it to be disease resistant. Muscadines, you've heard of muscadines, I'm sure. It's also an Arkansas native grape. It's an old one, and it is very thick-skinned. I don't know if you've seen it. It grows wild in ditches, and I know families that I know who go out and get those and can them, and we were blessed this year to get a jar of homemade muscadine jelly, and it is just delicious. It still grows in Arkansas. They go from, it's interesting, they're almost white to nearly black in color, and it's just great. It's made by grandmothers still. The recipes are handed down, and the secret location, I should say, the really good vines in the ditches, especially down by Little Rock and in central Arkansas, is something that you never tell. You get in big trouble. Then this one fascinates me, and I've heard it for years. It's the farkleberry. Farkle berry, B-E-R-R-Y. It is true. This is its name. It is the common name for the native evergreen shrub, Vaccinium arboreum, of the family Ericaceae arboreum. I'm awfully glad it's called farkleberry. And I don't know how they went from that to that, but I think it's interesting. And it's also sometimes referred to as the sparkleberry. It's very small, and you may have seen it and not realized you've seen it. It has small black berries, and they're very appealing to the birds, but not to humans at all. It can grow to 25 feet tall. It is definitely a shrub. And these were well known in a period of time that was not too great in Arkansas. And I can say this because I was here. Governor Faubus years as governor, I don't know how many of you, the Gazette, the Democrat Gazette used to be just the Gazette. And George Fisher was a master cartoonist. Oh my goodness, great political cartoons. And he took that on and said that, and did cartoons about Faubus and farkleberries. And farkleberry became a word that was generic and didn't have anything to do with grapes. And that's why it's so familiar, though, to Arkansans. And it was unique, became synonymous with the political situation in Arkansas. And the farkleberry shrubs do grow on the grounds of the Clinton Presidential Center in Little Rock. If you ever want to go in the fall when the berries are there, because there'll probably be a lot of birds there too at the same time. But anyway, it's really, that's something that is kind of a conundrum for Arkansas people to accept, but it did bring national notoriety to us, unfortunately. Alberta peaches, and I'm sure you're familiar with the Albertas, were introduced in Arkansas after the Civil War, and in Pike County had the largest peach orchard that was up and growing in 1904 in the whole nation. And beginning with 100 acres, it grew to cover 4,600 acres, and was at its peak, at its very peak, it was the largest in the United States. The Alberta peach is still a really good peach. It grew in small land, and I know that my relatives over in Batesville had not very many acres, but they were in the peach business. It is not an easy plant to grow. Peaches are difficult here for the very reason in North Arkansas is all of a sudden in March, when things are flowering, you know what happens, and you lose your crop. So it's nothing that I would recommend. We had a peach tree that a fella who would come out to the shop brought me that he'd grown in his compost. He'd thrown a pit into the compost pile, and it grew. I don't think it was in Alberta, and it never produced another peach. But the Alberta's a good old peach. And then there's the one that's really great is the Arkansas. I don't know how many of you've heard of this. The Arkansas black apple.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, real old apple. And in 1822, the Arkansas Gazette reported the discovery of the Arkansas black apple near Little Rock. And this is still a very favorite apple. Had a friend of mine in Memphis who, if we were ever coming to Memphis, we always had to take a sack of Arkansas apples. She loved them. And the reason she loved them is the reason it was such a favorite. It ripens in October, November. And it is very valuable for staying viable during the winter, and it's keeps a long time. And so it's still grown. It's not the, I like it. It's not as crisp as some, but it's a really good one, and you can sure bake with it and stuff like that. So it's still grown to get day in small orchards, and if you're interested in getting some, you all know where Leslie is, 65 to Little Rock. As you go through Leslie on the west side, on the right before you get to the bridge, just follow on, and there on the right, is that little spot, and you wouldn't think, and you pull off into this dirt road, and it's right there, and they're the ones, and they'll always have a sign up when they got them, so you don't have to pull off and go in. But when they got the sign up, if you want Arkansas black apples, that's the place to get it. I would like to give you a really good website, and so if your secretary will write it down, she can share it with you.
Write it down.
Or anybody else who has pen and paper. It's a really good one. It's the Audubon, audubon.org/native plants. You pull that up, and they'll have a segment there that will have a slot, and it'll say, put your zip code in here. So you put 72653 or whatever you are. And what you will find is 104 listed best wildflowers that we could grow, and wild plants, native plants. A few of them would be dogwood, beautyberry, and black walnut. And those are the ones that grow in our zip code, so it's in our area, so that makes them even better. The optimum they had was 304, which is a ton. The majority of the ones that I scrolled through were ones that are well known to us, and you can get them rather easily. So that's pretty much how I'm talking about native plants. Anybody have any questions about that they want to throw out, or comments that you have? Nothing? Okay, now we're going to get down to seeds. And I brought, I love catalogs. I don't know about you guys, but boy, January, when the mail starts coming and you start getting those seed catalogs, there's nothing better, especially if it's a gray month that it is, and they come in and they're so pretty. I like Burpees, I really do. John Sheepers is great. They send you tons of information. And Territorial Seed Company is way up in Maine, but they're really good. A very old company that's great. And I brought the one that I think is one of the best that you'll find. And you know what? They're right down the road. It's an awesome place. Baker Creek. They're heirloom seeds. This is this year's catalog. I've got this one here that Jennifer could take and share with you at your center. I thought maybe because this is last year's, I don't know that much has changed between this year's and between them, except they have new varieties. And before I get sidetracked and forget to tell y'all, where's my information? They're going to have their annual open house. If you've not been there, it's up by Mansfield. You go to Mansfield and turn right on the freeway. You go about to the first exit and you'll turn left off and go into the country. There should be a big sign. When I went there wasn't much of a sign. But it was a few years ago, and it was just fabulous. It has a huge warehouse that has every kind of seed would ever want. They have it also in this catalog, which makes it great. And they always, if you order from them, this is something you need to remember, they will send you free seeds with your order. It may not be something you've ever heard of, but it's awful fun. because they have seeds from all over the world. And they have grown amazingly in the last 5-6 years, I think. It's amazing. They started when I went there. They had a big bank with seeds, and they had a little 1 or 2 other outbuildings and a little stage, and they had vendors there. And at this thing that they have, which is either in May or April, I can't remember.
May 6th and 7th. It's May 6th and 7th.
Okay, May 6th and 7th. That's a Sunday and a Monday. And you'll pull in, you'll go out to a ways, but it doesn't take long to get to. And they have a big old field where you'll park, so we hope the rain is done by then. It's $5 a person, and take your boots and your hiking shoes. 500 vendors, and most of them are people with plants, so you can go absolutely nuts. And I mean, it is really, if you are wanting to see something that probably so many people would love to be close to, and we don't even have to travel far. So I would suggest you kind of think about that, and I might want to take a field trip for that. But heirloom seeds, I think, are fascinating. As I said, they are usually applied to fruit and flowers and vegetable varieties that have been grown before World War II. That is the accepted definition of heirlooms before World War II. Then the seeds of those fruits and vegetables that have been handed down were planted the following year, and the resulting plant will be just like the one before it. So this year's plant save the seeds from only heirloom seeds. You cannot save the seeds of a big boy, better boy, celebrity, anything like that, and have it come true. Yes, ma'am.
What about Norfolk? When we go past there, there's a seed place there.
It's no longer viable. I don't think it used to be run by the food bank, and it was just delightful. It was lovely, and that cute little place was neat. And I don't know if they had trouble staffing it. I know that I went in there quite often, and they had neat seeds. But yeah, it's a project that'd be nice.
I don't know if you remember me. I used to work in that seed shop back about 10 years ago.
Okay,
So,
sure. And it was so neat.
It was great.
It was.
And we sold Baker Creek seeds.
Yeah,
And,
that's how I got to know about Baker
yeah.
Creek seeds, actually. Yeah.
But it just, trouble staffing it
That's what
and
I-
interest.
At that point, and here's an interesting point, at that point, heirloom seeds were not big. And people were going, I want the latest and the greatest tomato. And by the way, tomatoes outsell everything else, and that's why I'm going to talk about tomatoes today. Not to say that there are not awesome seeds for all kinds, every kinds, and that's why this catalog is awesome, because it has everything that you have ever heard of and a lot that I'd never heard of, you know, from overseas and stuff. But, well, that's nice. I'm glad you could, yeah, because that was a neat place. I missed it. Yeah, too bad we can't get that going again, but we can get up to Mansfield, or you can order. But anyway, many of these heirloom seeds, as I said, they year after year. And what you do is you save the seeds. And this is how they've come to be. Your grandma saved those seeds. She dried them, she carried them the next year, she planted them. She had the same thing. You plant a hybrid seed, which is usually a clone or connection of 2 or more different kinds and varieties, and you get a plant that is, you know, maybe stronger, taller, greener, seedier, whatever. And you save those seeds and you plant them, and who knows what you're going to come up with, because it will be not a true seed. It will not be the same seed you planted the year before. It will be totally different. It could be very aberrant. You might come up with something spectacular, who knows? But the odds are not very, very good for that. And so that's what differentiates these seeds from each other as far as variety. And there are some other things too, which I'll mention later. But what's interesting, they have been handed down from generation to generation. And I love the stories about these seeds. I think I love as much as I love the seeds, because a lot of them came to America in the pockets of immigrants, or were sent in letters. There's a history here that I think bears repeating and bears carrying on. And I think so often we turn our backs on the things that were really precious to us long ago that I'm thrilled coming back to be present. That was an attempt at something, that's little seed place, but people were not ready. From the way people are talking, I think in the last 2 or 3 years, they're becoming more and more looking for something that is a little more, maybe it didn't come through in August or September, October. You can't buy any in November. You won't see any in the stores. But if you wait till next spring or you save that seed, you can have that again. And I think that in this day and age is really important. Two of the better known benefits of heirloom seeds that I really agree with totally is their adaptability, and uppermost on the tomatoes is the flavor. If you've ever sliced in to one of those seed plants or tomatoes that is all show and no taste, it can stand up to early blight terrifically. Doesn't taste like, why bother? Because it just doesn't cut it. And I really believe that. And I think that's what's important, almost more than anything else. They haven't been able to connect the gene that really makes it taste. Can you go back in your brain? I can. I can go back to Helena. On a summer day in my grandmother's garden, I go out there with a salt shaker and that's it. And I mean, I'm there. And the thing I can taste it. Can you remember that taste? Can you remember that fresh taste? Now you go out to your garden and you can pick a whole bunch, and they're peachy and they're almost perfect. Sweet 100s are a great example, and I do think cherry tomatoes come as close as any of them to having taste. But for me, it just doesn't cut it. But after having better flavor and things like that, I think the other thing is the memories that they bring to you, like my grandmother's garden. My grandmother was one of the first female landscapers in Arkansas. And so I grew up with her. She would go to garden and to landscape, and that's how I ended up where I am. I just grew up in the business. And that's also one reason I think the memories are really fresh with me. But I think we all have memories of that. And in the past 10 years, it's been great to see the thing begin to change. Also, selling tomatoes at that point was not taking them from green, from green outside and then letting them ripen on the vine. What's happened is with the hybrids is they decided they needed to send these across country. And so that's the transportation issue came in. And what they did is they figured out a way with the hybrids that they could pick them when they're green. And then there's a gas that's developed, and they will send them across hither and yon, and during that period of time they ripen because of the gas that they're using. So it's not a natural procedure.
They don't ripen, they turn red.
Pardon?
They don't ripen, they turn red.
Yeah, that's it. They do. You're exactly right. And that's where it loses, and sometimes tastes like mush, and some of them are mush. So it was an interesting phenomenon, and that was just the way things evolved. And each area in the olden days had their own small family gardens with favorite plants. And in Arkansas, tomatoes appeared in the 1800s. And in 1830, the first promotion to expand food choices brought tomatoes to Arkansas. You remember? I don't know if you remember, but tomatoes were considered for years to be poisonous. Mm-hmm. And they were in the nightshade family. Mm-hmm. And so they were just poisonous. And so some brave soul, we don't know his name, I would love to know who it was, said, I think I'll take a bite of that. and he lived to tell about it. And then they said, aha, we have a new thing on the market. And I'm thankful for that act. They perform best in their home and local farmers' gardens. We are blessed here for our farmers market. I think because we have, especially one fella that I know, and I met Joey from over by Pineville. He grows all of his stuff from seed. He grows it organically as much as he can, and he produces marvelous, marvelous heirloom tomatoes and heirloom peppers and things that you will not find anywhere else. If you are challenged to garden and have a difficulty, and each year is different in gardening anyway, and much less producing a lot, go see him. He is always set up across from the old time cafe on the square. Almost always he's there. And his plants that he produces are beautiful. And they're just as good as can be. He and I have talked about the catalog he uses, which is strictly heirlooms. He does do hybrids, because of course he's in business and trying to make a living. But we're trying to educate people into trying some new ones, and he just does a great job. And there's another fella that used to come, and he wasn't there last year. I don't know if his crop failed or.
John?
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen him in years.
And he produced really good stuff. I hadn't either. So, but be aware that if you can't produce them, go down and see Joey on the square, because he has a sweet little family and they all work hard and produce great produce and buy the plants from him. It's much easier than starting them from seed, you know. And so do that. I thought I'd talk about a few varieties that I love. And the reason I'm talking about them has nothing to do with how they taste or anything. It has to do with the stories. I love the stories. And then we'll talk about producing. But the stories to me are what make them so great. First one we'll talk about is Cherokee Purple. Mr. John Green, hello, in Severe, there he is, Sevierville, Tennessee. He's from, he's from Sevierville, Tennessee. He was given the seeds prior to 1890 by Cherokee Indians that had come to visit with him. And the only original characteristic noted was that when the seed would produce purple tomatoes, which was unheard of. And even now, you don't see too many of them. And this was in the 1890s, can you imagine? Now we know that they are very prolific. They produce a lot. They have large purple fruit. They are very sweet when they're ripe. And it takes 80 days to maturity. So you have to realize this is a late producing tomato, which is sometimes the only time we have a good crop here. Is if you plant a little later and let them go. And fall crops here are really pretty good of tomatoes. This would be an interesting one, and I know they have it at Baker Creek. I don't think that Joey has ever had Cherokee Purple. Brandywine, I bet.
No, I can't get in.
Is he locked out? Okay, we'll let him come in. Brandywine, and that's one of the ones that's synonymous with being an heirloom. I think most people have heard of the Brandywine tomato. An Ohio gardener was given the seed by a woman who said her family had handed down the seeds for over 80 years. This variety was one of the first heirlooms. So this was a long time ago. I couldn't find a date on this one, but I know that it's about one of the oldest at all. And it was one of the first that made a really big splash with home gardeners. So apparently the first person that had it, that's what happens with this kind of thing, is they pass it on to their neighbors and friends, and that's how they multiply, and that's how you continue the seed, and that's how the seed comes true. Now this one y'all should know about is Arkansas Travelers. Have y'all had that? That was also a real splash. It existed pre-1900s, which is interesting, but unfortunately it disappeared. And I couldn't find a cotton picking thing as to how come it disappeared, and I've never heard in all these years how come it disappeared. I know my dad loved it too, and he loved his big boys, but he loved Arkansas Travelers. And in 1968, which is relatively late, the University of Arkansas redeveloped it. They developed two open pollinated. Open pollinated is another term that they use almost interchangeably for heirloom. Two open pollinated strains. One was called the Traveler, and it was the first one. And then the new improved Traveler 76 came out later in 1976. The only reason I think that it has maintained its heirloom quality, or status, I guess you would say, is that the seed did exist and was known of in 1900, before 1900, and this has to be the designation. 1968 would be too late if that's when it appeared first. But then it returned through the University of Arkansas Extension and their Agri program in 1968. So I know, but it's listed with everybody. So it matures in 75 days, and the tomatoes are kind of a pink variety. They're not a bright red. They grow to about 8 ounce, produce about 8 ounce, and they are resistant to cracking, which, as you know, if the tomato grows too fast, it splits skin. So it doesn't seem to do that. And then the fourth one you may have all heard of, also Mortgage Lifter.
Yeah.
Do you know the story on that one? I love that. I'll go ahead and tell it, okay? Because maybe not. Mr. M.C. Biles, B-Y-L-E-S, he was an auto mechanic in West Virginia in the 30s. And he started growing these tomatoes. He had the seed, 2 to 4 pound tomatoes. And he began to, he said, well, I'm gonna sell these, because he grew so many, he didn't know what to do with them. So he grew them for $1 a piece, which that was in the early 40s. So that was $1 a piece for a teeny tiny plant. I mean, it's amazing. In a taped interview that I did not hear, but I saw the rendition of it, he said, and this is a quote, I didn't pay but $6,000 for my home, and I paid most of it off with tomato plants. I love that story. And it does make really large, meaty tomatoes, fairly disease resistant too. See, the hybrids have led us to believe that heirloom tomatoes are not resistant to anything, and because they weren't hybridized and worked through. So the thing you have to realize is they were resistant. Maybe the Arkansas Traveler would not be resistant to anything if it were grown in California or Utah or anywhere else. But Missouri, Arkansas, probably Tennessee, the places where the growing conditions are very similar, it'll do well. And that's the other difference. You know, these hybrid tomatoes can, for the most part, be grown just about anywhere. See, so that you have to consider that's the whole thing. They're regional, and native plants are the same way. And then the last one that I have to share with you is Viva Lindsay's Kentucky Heirloom. And this is the sweetest story, and I also like it because my name is Lindsay. So that's why I read about that one. This is a neat story. The great aunt of Viva's, V-I-V-A-S, fiance, gave her seeds of this tomato as a wedding gift in 1922. It hit me really hard because I'm really good for twins. But today we have lists of things in a store that people can go and buy for people for a wedding, and you're kind of expected to do this. This was their all they had, these seeds, and yet they were so special. She gave them as a wedding gift to Viva, and the rest is, as they say, history. Because I think tomatoes are just a cherished part of Christmas. Not ever. Only the ones that have tripped in, they're a cherished part of summer. And that's why people, it was funny, we had 18 calls Saturday on the show, and it's been kind of slow up to now. And Bob looked at me and he said, it must be spring. Because everybody, and you know, once you get into February, and the catalogs are coming in, and maybe just a John Holmes daffodil.
Yeah.
I think that the memories and the seeds are as valuable as they ever were. And they carry with them memories of your summers and your childhood and your families. And I enjoyed looking into the history of these, of both native plants and heirloom seeds. You won't find them. The thing that kind of has been interesting to me is because I've been looking for them on the seed packets, you know, where they have seeds in all the stores. There are very few heirloom seeds, and that's why I say these catalogs. And the other thing is to make sure that you look very closely, because they're not going out heirloom big on the package. I'm not sure they're wanting to push them very much, because they know that once you get them, you'll probably like them. And if you want to, you can save the seeds and you get the same thing. So it's commercially not very, I guess, it's great for them to do that, which I think is kind of silly. So be careful, read the small print, go through people who have entire organic. Organic is another word they use interchangeably, and I'm not sure if that's quite, I don't know if that has to do with the name on the catalog or the name on the packet. But there are very few, and so look hard. And also then, if you have a chance, go up to Baker Creek. They're open every weekend, and then every weekend in the spring they'll have, and then they'll in May have that wonderful festival. The other times they still have the seeds and the places are open. They just don't have all the vendors and the hoopla that's going on, but it's great. There's a couple of things I want to mention. The Arkansas Native Plant Society. If you will, I'm trying to figure out if I have that. If you will just go on to Google and Google Arkansas Native Plant Society. It will come up. It is a group. It's awesome if you're interested in Arkansas plants in particular, because every week you get an email about a certain plant in Arkansas that's a native plant, where it can grow, what it can do, and a picture of it, number one. And number two, then, they also send out a newsletter, and they have a great website. I would encourage you to look into that. And then there's a group that I could do a whole dog and pony show on, Seed Savers in Iowa. It's a whole new, it's not new, it started in Missouri, but now it's really reaching its apex. I think there are 8,000 members. It is a nonprofit organization whose goal is, in part, as a result of the GMO testing, I think, probably, and all those changes, because it is incorporating as many good, true seeds. And their goal is to save those seeds so that we'll have access to them. And you can, bazillion seeds. There's one in Norway, Oslo, I think. Anyway, over in there, and there's a huge one there, and I think that's where it originated, the whole idea originated. But if you will get on the Seed Savers website, get on Google that if you're interested in that. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And so that's about all I have. But I'll be glad to answer some questions if I can, if you have any. Yes, ma'am.
I had read about a new method of gardening where you don't disturb, you don't rototill your garden, and you simply dig out your little spot, plant your seeds, and let it go at that. What do you feel about that?
I think it's very smart. The reason being that they've come out with this, and I only read about it just recently,
Yes.
or maybe in the last 6 months. They have come up, and it totally makes sense. When you rototill, you're stirring up every seed that's in that ground, and it's saying, hurrah, I can grow now. And most of those seeds are weed seeds, or invasive grasses, or Bermuda grass, or dandelions, whatever you have been spending the previous summer trying to get rid of. So it makes sense to me that you could. I don't think you can just dig a little hole and put it in. I do think that you need to amend the soil to some degree, because if you're growing anything, if it's like our yard and our gardens, every year we have new rocks. I mean, we grow rocks better than anything, you know, right? If there was an opening at the Baxter County Fair, Master Gardeners, you need to get on that. It's just that I think you have to amend the soil. And one thing that the Extension Service does that you need to think about, and fall is the best time, is to get a sample sent off. It's free, totally free. You go out in your plot, wherever it is, and you pull about a cup, 12 cups, and put them in a Ziploc bag.
That's all the soil we've got.
Touche. That's true. But I still think maybe you might want to do, especially if you're new, if you have a new garden spot. I didn't mean every year in your regular garden spot. But, yeah. So add, and there are good additives. There are good additives. Just be, but what they'll do is they'll send you a really, really detailed map of how, what you need to add. And I've had people tell me that once they did that, after I recommended it, the next year their garden was amazing. That does not mean it's going to be amazing for 10 years, because things get depleted and you will have to re-add. But I think if you add something to the soil, or even the spot you're digging in, you'll have a little bit better results. And make sure it's not compacted. But I think the tilling thing, I think it makes real sense.
What about, we've got a lot of horse manure. Do you feel that should be put in the fall and rototilled in, or put it in the spring and rototilled?
It has to be real old. You know, it can't be fresh.
Okay, we'll put it in
anything.
compost. We put it in compost and
Okay.
let it
So
sit for a year.
at least 6 months, and
Yeah.
if not a year. Yeah, I would do that in the fall. And then I'd amend it with some probably in the spring. We tend to, you know, they tell us you gotta add this, you gotta add that, and all this other stuff. And oftentimes people don't realize that they need to kind of measure and not dump the whole bag in one hole. And then you end up with all this really great early growth, and then it just burns up. Well, it's potent stuff. And so I would err on the side of less is more. They're wanting to sell fertilizer. And I'm not being jaded, but I am being realistic that they do have there. But if you back off a little, if you have good friable soil, you have some moisture, sunshine, most plants will kind of chug along for you. course, there's deer and there's
Yeah.
and antelope, but, yeah. And, yes, sir.
We have a common friend, Craig Olmsted, tried that. He did that gardening like that. He basically just stuck a fork in the ground and you know what happened, the boy got sick and didn't have a real good final of it. But it was doing good until he got sick and couldn't care for it anymore.
Yeah, and you still will have weeds. I mean,
Yeah.
the fact that you didn't rototill will not keep that from happening. You still have to do, keep up with it. It's, yeah, and if you haven't gardened before, my recommendation is always to start small.
Yeah, amen.
Well, we got too big, and what we did was, we got this black plastic and cut little X's in there and put our plant in there, and I thought, boy, this'll work good. Extra heat, and all it did was, all the weeds that came around the plants, and you couldn't keep, it was more than you could, you'd go out a week later and it's all there, and it was that weedy stuff that's really hard to get out, the crabgrass or something.
No,
It's
and
not
I don't think I would recommend black plastic anyway, because if it gets too hot, it's gonna heat the soil and you'll have a mucky mess underneath there. That's the only other thing that I'd be careful about. I love mulch, and mulch is, I think, a really good thing to have. And then good friable soil. The trick, and it's not a trick, but what I recommend people to do is get a handful of soil from your garden where you're wanting to plant and squeeze it like this in a ball, and then open your hand. If it sits there in a ball, number one, it's too wet and it's too clay. If it completely falls out, then it's too what's called friable, and that means it's not going to hold anything. It's just nothing. So you got to get in a happy medium between this and this, because if it's not nothing, it's not going to work.
What's the best mulch?
What's the best mulch? I like newspaper mulch. I think it's great. If you, instead of plastic, I would use newspaper. Not the glossy things that you get in coupons, but the newspaper itself. You can make about 4 inches, or 4 or 5, 6, and then you put that around. It's a great mulch, and then you can top it with something decorative. Because it doesn't look, it's not the prettiest thing in life. And don't use the colored ink, funny papers. And I don't know if that's still true, but I know it used to be that had a quality that would burn. The color itself was not good for the soil.
We go ahead, anything that's new, we try every year, and I don't know what we're gonna do.
Okay, look up hay bale.
The tomatoes grew like crazy in the hay bales.
But my friend who did that,
Straw bales, it was.
straw bales, yeah.
Straw
You
bales.
dig a hole in the straw bale, put some dirt in, and plant. The only problem was with my friend was it brought everything up right to the deer level. And he lost they went out and ate everything, and they didn't even have to work at it. He had put it right there. Didn't have to lean over. I think it sounds like a great concept. Yes, ma'am, you had a question.
I'm allergic to newspaper ink, but when I use regular mulch, the ticks are so bad I can't work in my garden. Do you have another thought on mulch?
What were you using?
Like pine mulch or hardwood mulch, and the ticks are.
Oh, I wouldn't use hardwood mulch in a vegetable garden at all.
No, in our garden.
Okay, just as decorative?
I'm not sure, really honestly, I don't know what kind of wood mulch it was. We inherited it, but I know I had to take all that mulch out because the ticks were so thick, even the guineas would take.
I don't think that's what I consider mulch. I consider mulch more of a product that is more broken down and not for decorative use as such. I don't think stone is good. And I'm talking vegetable gardens. I'm talking not landscaping. For landscaping uses, it's usually fine and dandy. With the stones, they will reflect heat, so you have to be cautious of that. But with just a regular, just a mulch that is broken up and nice and I'm at the loss for word. Pine needles are good if you have plants that need acid. Like blueberries, yeah. Azaleas, gardenias, those kind, but not particularly in a vegetable garden. I would not use pine needles. Just a regular all-purpose mulch. And and I don't offhand know anywhere that does has a truckload they can deliver for you. I really don't. Dean's Feed used to have some really good, pretty good stuff. Cocoa bean mulch I like, it smells good, but I wouldn't use it in a vegetable garden. And I still think, if, could you have somebody else put the newspaper down for you? And I'm not being, I mean really and truly, so that you wouldn't have to handle it, because you certainly don't want to,
The problem then is if I got a weed or anything, I'm so allergic to it that I.
Then you'll have to say, you don't need to weed for me today, because do you know, where's your newspaper? I'm sorry, I can't just,
What about cottonseed hulls with people?
cold cottonseed, thank you. On the back. Cottonseed hulls, if you can find them, man alive are they good, and they're great in the garden. And if we could go to South Arkansas, I bet we could find a lot of
You
cottonseed
can
hulls.
be great.
Pardon?
Greg?
East Arkansas.
Oh, good, okay.
Jonesboro, Blyville.
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah.
Vicki Greg's has a,
Greg Farm, oh, Greg Farm. Do they, okay. Greg Farm has them. That's good stuff.
Great, thank you.
Vicki, sorry.
Go ahead.
One of the things, and I'm a slow learner, so this is coming from somebody that doesn't learn very fast. When you garden, you've got to have a good basic. And take your soil before you get started down to the extension office. It's your tax money at work. They'll analyze that soil for you, and you can put whatever you might need to into that soil before you get started. Because if you put it in the wrong growing medium, you're just not going to have any good luck at all. And anyway,
And it's
Mark, keep
a
this
free
together.
service
Yeah.
too, which is really awesome. They send it down south to a lab down there that does all of that. And it's a very in-depth report that you'll get. Yes, sir.
Kind of on a different subject. Is there anything you could recommend to treat unaffected roses to keep them from being infected with the rosette virus?
Space. There really isn't at this point. And that'll take over. You almost have to start over in a lot of places, especially if they're close together. Yeah, that's have you got that? We just dug them up and got rid of them at that point. I wish I had a better answer.
Have you read anything on this? It's called hugelkultur or hugelkultur. I think it's hugelkultur. It's a European. It's kind of a lasagna gardening thing where you build your bed up, but you start out with wood. You like dig
Oh, I
a trench.
have.
Yeah.
And it's the strangest looking thing when you look at it. They pile up a whole bunch of wood, and they kind of let that decay. And then they start building their layers on top of that, and it's Hugul something, isn't it?
Culture. Yeah.
Hugel.
Hugel.
That's how the Germans would pronounce it.
Okay.
I have a small one in my backyard,
Oh, do you?
Oh, cool.
How old is it?
maybe 4 or 5 years old.
How's it doing? Tell us how
I
it
have
was.
all kinds of flowers that's growing on it right now. And, what I did is I dug a hole
I'm sure.
and I put it at the lower end of the water would drain down there, and all the rocks I got out of my vegetable garden, I made about an 8x8 water catch that would stay wet for butterflies and other things that need to have a water place for water. And now I've got flowers, perennial flowers coming up. I even have, I don't know where it even came from, the birds have probably planted some of them. I've got a little crepe myrtle coming out of the ground back there. All of a sudden.
That's awesome. I've never
I
had
just
any,
left it alone. I put some rocks around it so I wouldn't mow over it.
yeah, so eventually what it
I
does,
started
it
with
all
a
just,
large pile of dead branches that all is
boy, we
better
need
than
one
burning
of
them.
those. We could do that. Oh, that sounds great. I've
But
read about it,
one
but
thing I
never
read
known
in Europe, They
anybody.
used them to create big mounds.
That was the pictures I saw for that, yeah. Great. You haven't done any vegetable gardening on top of it?
Yeah, I just got some flowers in there, yeah.
Okay, that sounds
I would
good.
think it would work because
I would
there should
think
be
so.
lots of nutrients under there now, that wood should have
Well,
rotted.
now it would, yeah. How long did it take? I mean, so you've had it 3 years.
3 or 4 years,
What happened to the first year?
not much.
Okay, so it's it's the breakdown of all that, and that old wood, yeah. That's awesome, thank you for your question, and I'm so glad someone knew, had from
That's
practical
cool.
experience,
Yes.
that's awesome. So all that old, all those, after the ice storm, that would have been a good thing to do. Yeah. Anybody else?
I was just gonna ask about adding sand to make the clay parts of the garden. Is that a good idea or not?
For drainage, I wouldn't use it only that. I mean,
No, but I mean to mix it in. and grow it.
Sure. Sure would.
What about Miracle Grow, the dirt and the fertilizer part? How do you feel about that?
You know, I used to use Miracle Grow, the potting soil quite a bit. And about the last 2 years, I guess it's been 2 or 3 years, and I don't get any, I don't usually say anything about products, but when asked, I do. I have not used Miracle Grow potting soil for the last several years. It had big sticks in it. And I thought, I've got enough of those. And it had changed consistency. And in the bags, you weren't getting a lot of dirt, you were getting a lot of trashy things, and this last one had something, I wasn't even sure what it was. It was not organic, and it was like pieces of, I don't know if their quality control issue has come up. I don't know if they've changed their mix or not. And I'm having trouble finding anything to replace it with. As far as their fertilizers, I'm fine, except that just recently, and I can't remember, I wish I remember. Be sure if you're getting, I was looking for bone meal to apply to spring bulbs. It's a really good thing to put on your spring bulbs, especially after they bloom, because they're worn out. And that will really help them have better blooms, or good blooms the next year on their daffodils and things. And I was looking for bone meal, and they had, for flowers, a flower granule thing. And it was not the right formula. It had more nitrogen in it than it had what you need for flowers, and it's in flowers. So let me just briefly say, there are 3 numbers on fertilizers, 3 main numbers. And the first one's for green leaves, green grass, green whatever, or your philodendron, whatever. So if the first number is like 600, 657, whatever, not 657, 6, there's a 600 fish emulsion. Fish emulsion is great for green leaves, stinks to high heaven. It is a great fertilizer for anything green like beans or anything else too. For flowers, you want 15, 30, 15. You want the middle number to be the largest. It's just really important, and this one was like 642, which was totally erroneous. And they had tons of the stuff, and it was a brand I'd never seen. So I would say buyer beware and be careful of what you do. The fertilizer it is very easy to use, the granular. This is granular. The other that you get in the blue and it makes blue water, those are really good for just general feeding. It really is, and you can, on your house plants, I don't think you can go wrong because you use a specified amount. And of course, you don't need to fertilize house plants in the winter at all. In the next couple of weeks, they'll be starting to send off new growth probably, and that's when you want to start fertilizing them again. And you want a high nitrogen for ficus and for palms and for any of those kind of houseplants, the peace lilies and the Chinese evergreens and things like that. But for flowers, make sure that middle number is the largest. The last number is there for the roots, and it's not a necessity. It's a good thing, and there's always 3 numbers. But for houseplants and for plants that we're growing in our gardens, it should never ever be the largest. Flowers are the middle number, and leaves and things, and lettuce and arugula, wonderful things that you can grow. That first number. So, thanks. That's a good question to have this time of year. Are you all getting ready to go plant?
Vicki, can I ask you about the Bradford Fair?
Sure.
I have a friend who swears it's the work of the devil. And it
Well, there's a person in Little Rock who thinks that too. And who wrote about it last spring and made a giant article on it and has made everybody feel guilty. What has happened is that those pears have proliferated, and if you go into the woods, they have become invasive. I do not think it's the plant of the devil. I think it's beautiful. When grown, I think what happened too also is a very weak limb tree, and when we had the ice storm and things, they got torn up terribly. But I think her point was that they become invasive, and they're taking over in areas where native plants are having a difficult time growing. It is not, no, it's a wonderful landscape plant. I think it's beautiful. We had one, and it was gorgeous, and we still miss it. But I won't replant. It's a short-lived tree. In certain areas, it's just beautiful, and it's great, but for the most part, it's short-lived, and it's beautiful, but it's nothing. That has gone around and around, and I think that she's made an issue of it, and now it's time to move on. And maybe somebody will create a hybrid that will take its place, and in all probability, that's what will happen.